Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar presentation this morning, Abandon-Proofing Your Petition. Appreciate everyone joining us from countries all over the world. And as we always do, I'm going to just ask that as you are joining us, if you would be so kind, just in the chat section of your screen, just let us know where you're joining us from. It's always interesting and exciting for us to see all the different countries represented on our webinar presentations, and appreciate you taking a moment to do that. My name is Ron Hoppe. I'm the CEO of Worldwide HealthStaff Solutions, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this informational webinar session this morning. While others continue to log on, just want to draw your attention to a few housekeeping items. You will see in the upper right-hand corner of the chat section of your screen a yellow box, or as we affectionately refer to it as our Post-it note. And in the Post-it note, you will find a couple of links. The first link is you can connect live with a Worldwide HealthStaff recruiter during the course of this presentation today. So if you have a reason or interest in connecting with a HealthStaff recruiter, just click on that link that's displayed there in the Post-it note, and you'll be able to do that. Also, later on, before we conclude our presentation, we'll have a bit of information about our referral program. That's really gained wide acceptance, a lot of excitement. It's actually fun. So we'll talk just a bit about that as we wrap up. So as we go through our presentation today, your questions are very welcome. Today in our presentation, questions will be particularly important. My actual presentation today is going to be fairly brief, so I hope it will leave us a lot of time to respond to questions, which always is a great way for us to be able to share and exchange information with you. So again, as we prepare to start, take a moment and in the chat section, just let us know the country that you're joining us from today. It's not uncommon at all for us to have individuals from 20 or 30 different countries joining these presentations, and it's always interesting to see exactly what those countries are and where our audience is joining us from. So with that being said, let's dive right in to our topic today, which, as stated, is Abandon-Proofing Your Petition. It's a bit of a odd title, perhaps, but let's dive in and start to sort of define some terms and just be clear about what exactly that we're talking about. And I should say at the outset that this webinar presentation today is one that we have developed specifically in response to a lot of questions, a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth, and quite frankly, some misinformation that we're seeing on various social media channels and outlets. So we thought it would be very helpful to take the time today and provide some clarity, provide some accurate information that everyone can take on board and process in their own context. So the presentation today really is one that we have developed specifically in response to questions and discussion that we're seeing taking place in various public forums. So when we're talking about abandonment, what are we talking about? And in the context of our presentation today, which I think will be primarily of interest to candidates that currently have a petition or have a job offer where a petition is about to be filed. So Abandonment simply describes the circumstance that happens where an employer initiates a visa application, right? So they go through the recruiting process, candidates are extended a job offer, the job offer is accepted, an immigration petition is filed in most cases, right? And after the immigration application is filed, abandonment happens if the employer then decides to withdraw a job offer prior to visa issuance. Okay, so you think you have an immigration petition underway, and you do, but at some point in the process, the employer decides to withdraw their job offer prior to visa issuance. And when that happens, we have this circumstance that is referred to as abandonment. Okay. Now, one point that I would like to address very, very directly, and this is very important point in the presentation today, and that is the question of why would an employer abandon an application, right? Why would an employer abandon an application? And to answer that question, I think it's important, first of all, that we take a moment and just understand priority dates, but also understand direct hire versus contract labor or staffing. So bear with me for just a moment. And I think it'll be important for everyone to have the right context for us to just take a moment to review direct hire versus contract labor. So if you're an international nurse candidate and you're already in process, you may already know this. But if you're just looking at beginning your U.S. immigration journey, all recruitment opportunities to the United States are not the same. They're not equal. We've been saying for years, all job offers are not created equal. And it's important to understand the differences that exist in the different opportunities that different organizations are presenting. In fact, we're going to have a webinar coming up here in the not too distant future, specifically on that topic. And we invite you to be on the lookout on social media and register for that. But for the purposes of our discussion today at a high level, direct hire and contract labor are different in this way. In a direct hire relationship, your job offer is coming specifically and directly from a named U.S. employer. As opposed to in a contract labor or staffing relationship, it is that staffing agency that provides the offer to you. So you're being hired by the staffing agency. But at the end of the day, that staffing agency only has positions available to offer to you based on the contracts that they may have or may not have with U.S. employers. So this is a very important point of distinction, and I think from what we're seeing online, also a point of some misunderstanding, and quite frankly, a point of some misinformation. So ultimately, it comes down to there has to be a U.S. employer willing and able to employ the candidate when they arrive in the United States. In our experience, over many, many years, almost 26 years now of providing direct hire international recruitment services, it is very, very rare, particularly at this time, that an employer will abandon their international nurse recruitment program. It does happen, but it's rare. So the question is, why would an employer do that? There's a couple of reasons. By far, in our experience, the most common reason is there has been a change in the senior leadership of a particular organization, they probably have little information or familiarity on the program. And because they are new to the organization, and many times being new comes with a mandate for changing things and doing things differently. So we find that on occasion, if an employer decides to discontinue their international recruiting program, it's because of new leadership making an arbitrary decision that is not necessarily based on the best long-term interests of the organization. Some U.S. healthcare organizations are having financial challenges coming out of the pandemic. So as they work on getting their finances in order, sometimes they're focused only on, financial results quarter to quarter and not longer term. And because international recruitment is a longer term proposition, sometimes that is seen as an opportunity to reduce budget. But again, these opportunities are rare. But when they do happen, right, they do get a lot of attention, right? And obviously to the affected candidates, they're of great concern and cause many questions and some anxiety. And hopefully we can address some of the circumstances around that. So abandonment generally happens when an employer initiates a visa application and then decides to withdraw a job offer anytime prior to the visa being issued. It is the employer's right to do this. They are not doing anything that is contrary to any immigration rules or regulations, right? And generally speaking, the very vast majority of U.S. employers that have invested in an international program want to see a return on that investment. So again, this happens very rarely. But when it does happen, as I said, it tends to gain a lot of attention, and it certainly causes some disruption and some anxiety with affected candidates. So in a direct hire situation, right, you are being hired by a named U.S. employer, so you know exactly the name of the hospital, the location of the hospital where you're going to be working at. Whereas in a contract labor situation, right, you are not being hired directly by any U.S. hospital. You are being hired by that staffing agency. And that staffing agency, when you read their agreements carefully, they are the ones that have the sole discretion at determining where it is that you're ultimately going to be assigned. And again, the staffing agency can only assign you to a location if they have a contract at that location. So these are a couple of important distinctions to recognize as well. There's one other point that I want to touch on because it's also going to be very important as we talk about abandonment, and that is understanding priority dates. Because priority date is extremely important if an abandonment circumstance arises. So U.S. visa applications, specifically EB3 RN applications, are generally processed based on what is known as your priority date. Priority date is assigned by USCIS, and your priority date is generally going to be the date on which your application is first initially received by USCIS and entered into their system. So for example, today is Wednesday. If a petition was sent to USCIS today by express post or by courier, it would probably be entered into their system maybe as early as Friday or Monday or Tuesday of next week. So if your petition was filed today, and your petition was added to the USCIS system on Monday, the date on Monday becomes your priority date. Okay, so that's important. And based on your priority date, the USCIS, when they receive your application, they also issue something called a receipt notice. The next thing that happens is your application then goes into queue, right? It goes into queue for processing. And once your application is reviewed and processed, the vast majority of cases initially straight away are approved, and an approval notice is issued. In some rare cases, a USCIS may request some additional information. Once that information is provided and everything's in order, the petition is approved. So there's two things here that are important to note. One is, how is your priority date established? And the fact that your application, once it's adjudicated, is going to be approved. This is a very important point, because when it comes to recapturing a priority date, which is very possible to do. So this means that if you have an approved I-140 petition with employer A, and something happened with employer A, let's say there was an abandonment situation, okay? If you have an approved case, if your application has been approved and you have an approval notice, you can then use that initial or existing priority date and have that date transferred to any new immigration application that might be filed on your behalf by employer B. So really a super, super important point here to understanding what happens in abandonment. If you have a petition filed that has not been approved, then you are unable to recapture a priority date. If you have a petition filed, your initial employer withdraws your job offer, right? But that petition has already been approved, then you are able to make application to have your existing priority date applied to any subsequent or new filing that may take place for your journey to the U.S. So a couple of very, very important points there. If you do have any questions about any of this, please just jot them down, put them in the chat section of your screen, and we'll certainly get to them in a moment. So I did comment briefly on direct hire versus contract labor or staffing. And I want to address this issue in a slightly different context as well, with the heading of why does direct hire matter? And some applicants online are discussing, right, the reality that a lot of U.S. employers are looking at decreasing contract labor. That is in fact true. And if you take a look at domestic contract labor in the United States over the last number of years, so in the last 12 months, the utilization of contract labor or staffing labor with U.S. employers is down about 40%. This is for domestic staffing, okay? Very important to note. But there is a strong focus on the part of U.S. employers on the domestic front to move away from contract labor in a very aggressive way, with a view to trying to hire as many of these staff directly, right, directly onto their payroll as is possible. Okay. There's a second issue in this regard that's emerging as well. And just touch on this briefly, because I think it's also relevant. What we are starting to see in the United States, with some employers, the nursing workforce is unionized. And in these facilities, they are using contract labor, both domestic and international. And in these union relationships with employers, as those agreements and relationships come up for negotiation or renegotiation, the unions are taking an increasingly strong position against supporting contract labor or staffing labor, while at the same time being strongly in favor of direct hire recruitment, whether that be domestic or international. So if you are concerned about, the information that's circulating about U.S. employers decreasing their reliance on contract labor, that's true. It is also true they are increasing their focus on direct hire. And at Worldwide HealthStaff, we're seeing a growing demand from our clients and from new clients who are looking to displace contract or staffing labor with direct hire permanent placement because of the recognized benefits that they derive in the context of being able to provide increased quality care by having an optimum number of core staff, and also able to achieve better financial results because of the much higher costs that are associated with contract labor. So again, a lot of information there, but I think it's important, right? It's important to have this context. And I just have a couple of points here. So according to Kaufman Hall 2023 State of Healthcare Performance Improvement Report, published on October 24th, so within kind of the last 6 months or so, 60% of hospitals and health systems are seeing a decrease in the utilization of contract labor. This figure is up from 44% in 2022. So this verifies, the comments that I've just shared with you. And at the same time, hospital efforts are focused on increasing domestic and international direct hire. That's what we're seeing. Clearly, if a facility is decreasing its reliance on contract labor, it doesn't mean that the work has gone away. They're just wanting to engage with their workers in a different way. So even as U.S. employers are looking to minimize their reliance on contract labor, they are doubling down their efforts in direct hire, both domestically and internationally. And this is why Worldwide HealthStaff Solutions is able to continue to offer a growing number of opportunities to well-qualified international candidates. So the topic of our presentation today is abandon proofing, right? Abandon proofing your petition, and what can you do? So just to be very, very transparent, as I said already, it is the U.S. employer that submits your U.S. immigration application, and they have the right and the ability, should they decide to do so on rare occasions, to withdraw that job offer. So then how do you put yourself in the best possible position if that circumstance was to occur to you or for you? So let's just take a look at a couple of things that we have found are very, very important for an applicant to be able to transition from one employer to a second employer very, very quickly, okay? Very, very quickly, sometimes in a matter of days. And again, I will just want to make this point and emphasize it very strongly. If you have an approved petition with an initial employer, and you're now having to file a petition with a second employer, you might say, oh my goodness, this is a delay, this is terrible, this is going to cause my application to take longer. The reality is that's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily true, because even though a new petition is being filed, you're essentially keeping your place in line by virtue of being able to recapture the priority date. So Having to move to a new employer can extend the timeline slightly, particularly if you are in the latter stages of the process. But in most cases, the ability to recapture your priority date means there's really very minimal addition of processing time to your application. So things that you can do to put yourself in the best possible position if you were to find yourself in this circumstance. Number one, keep your nursing experience current, right? This remains the highest priority for all U.S. Healthcare employers of all kinds. And candidates that have stronger experience are far more likely to very, very quickly be placed with another employer as opposed to a candidate whose experience perhaps is more marginal. So number one, keep your nursing experience current. Secondly, make sure you're holding a valid visa screen certificate. Okay, hold a valid visa screen certificate because the process sometimes can move very, very quickly. Maybe you're at the DQ stage, or maybe you're even have an embassy appointment letter in hand, right? This process of filing a new petition, gaining an approval notice, etc., can move very, very quickly. So you don't want to be hung up because you don't have a valid visa screen in hand. And then secondly, be flexible and be agile, right? Change sometimes is difficult, and I appreciate that if you have an expectation that you're going to location A, and maybe now you're going to location B, even if location B is generally very close to your original assignment location, some flexibility and some agility on your part, being able to respond quickly is also going to result in being able to arrive in the U.S. in the shortest possible time. So abandon proofing yourself is, very important to keep your nursing experience current. Ensure that you hold a valid visa screen certificate and have some flexibility so that your immigration journey continues to go forward as expeditiously as possible. When we find ourselves in circumstances of change, and particularly unwelcome change, right? Often it's I think a part of human nature that our minds automatically go to sort of the worst possible case scenario, right? What's going to happen now? Is this the end of my U.S. dream, etc.? So I also want to just briefly share, a little just commentary on the importance of having perspective, right? So if you should find yourself in the most unlikely position that you have an employer that abandons your petition, right? And abandonment can mean, as we've been talking about, they withdraw your job offer. Abandonment in the context of a staffing agency relationship, perhaps the job offer isn't withdrawn, but they just don't have a job for you. You have your visa interview coming up. You have maybe even your visa in hand, and your deployment is being delayed because they just don't have a contract with an employer where they can place you. So perspective, right? Abandonment, while unwelcome, right? Unwelcome is not the end, right? Abandonment really, if it does happen, is really look at it as a circumstance in which you are being redirected, maybe even to a better opportunity, right? Just because it's different doesn't mean it's worse, doesn't mean it's better, but it could certainly be better, right? Abandonment is not the end. Abandonment is a redirection. And in working with Worldwide HealthStaff Solutions, our applicants are assured of always having access to the largest number of opportunities with the largest number of employers in more locations than they would have working with anyone else. So those are my thoughts on the topic of abandonment and what you can do to fully understand what abandonment really is and how you can ensure that you're in the best possible position to follow that opportunity for redirection and to have your your journey to the U.S. continue on with minimal or any disruption, and that you can arrive in the U.S. in the shortest period of time possible. Now, I'm joined this morning also by my colleague, Tracy Drake, who often is partnering with us on these webinars. Tracy, hello.
Hello.
And Tracy's been monitoring the chat section for any questions that may have come in. So, Tracy, I'm going to turn it over to you to guide us through any questions that you may have been seeing, and we'll do our very best to respond to every one of them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ron. Yeah, and thank you guys for your questions there. I'm going to pull some from the chat, and let's jump right into it. One of the first questions we have was actually asked just before this webinar came online. So we're going to pull just a couple of those questions, and we'll jump right into these. Now that the visa bulletin has not been progressing, I have the feeling that my employer will abandon me because of the longer wait. Can you speak on that, Ron?
Yeah. So the visa bulletin, all right, everybody's watching it from month to month. In the last couple months, it's kind of been static as the date goes forward. I think at this particular point in time, it's our strong view that the visa processing date and the visa bulletin is still very much within an acceptable range. I think U.S. employers all understand that international recruitment can easily be an 18 to 24 month proposition, and the fact that we're still well within that 24-month time frame, we here at Worldwide HealthStaff have really no concern or very minimal concern that employers are going to change their position on international recruiting just because the visa bulletin hasn't moved in the last 2 months. Obviously, everybody would like candidates to arrive as quickly as possible. The candidates want that. The employers want that. But again, the employers have an urgent need. There is a shortage of nursing in the U.S., right? So want to be very clear. When we talk about employers moving away from utilization of contract labor or staffing labor, it doesn't mean that there's less work to do or that there's fewer nurses needed. In fact, the workload remains unchanged. It just means that employers are looking to have a different relationship with those individuals working at their location. The relationship they're looking for is direct hire. So I would say, if anything, it's those applicants with direct hire positions who are more secure, and I would even say far more secure in their petitions going forward to completion than candidates that aren't in a direct hire situation.
Next question. My employer has taken so long to get my petition filed. Maybe it's pending PWD or notice of filing after hire. They must not be too interested in continuing with my offer and will probably abandon me, especially with the longer wait from petition filing.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, interesting comment, and I can understand that sentiment to some degree. I think that I've never in my career of 26 years encountered a circumstance where any employer said, we're going to recruit internationally, we're going to interview and hire nurses, and then not have that employer file those immigration petitions. I've never seen it happen. I don't expect I ever will. Now, the issue about notice of filings and prevailing wage, I understand that concern. It's something that these are steps that need to be completed before a petition can be filed. That step sometimes is taking a little longer with clients that are recruiting for the first time, right? And don't have familiarity with the process. Or what we're finding as we're dealing with larger and larger, more complex organizations, it's just taking some time to have these various processes completed by the appropriate people in the organization. We try to minimize very much the time that elapses from the time that a candidate gets a job offer until the time that their petition is filed. But sometimes there are just circumstances around the administrative process of a notice of filing or prevailing wage. We try to interview only when there's a prevailing wage in hand or one that is expected in the very near future. So to the person who posed this question, I empathize with your concern, but I can also assure you that there is no expectation that your employer is going to not move forward in filing your petition. If you are a HealthStaff candidate and you have an assigned case manager, please continue to communicate clearly and often with your case manager, and they will do the same to keep you updated on the status of your application and what the anticipated next step is and when that next step is likely to occur.
Very good. Next question. I hear that U.S. hospitals are withdrawing contingent labor and staffing. Doesn't this mean that many hospitals are terminating their contracts with different international agencies?
Yeah, also interesting question. So that's what we've been talking about in part, right, during our presentation today. And again, to be clear, the answer, if the question is, are U.S. healthcare employers reducing their reliance or their utilization of contract labor, the answer is yes. Are they reducing their reliance on contract labor, both domestically and internationally? The answer is yes. But as it relates to international recruiting and direct hire, the answer is no. In fact, employers continue to be focused and be devoting substantial additional efforts at looking to increase their number of direct hires. So by deduction, without too overtly doing a commercial for Worldwide HealthStaff, as an international nurse at this time, you want to be very, very focused on finding the best direct hire opportunity that you can find for yourself.
Thank you. And what happens if my employer abandons me while I'm processing with Worldwide HealthStaff Solutions?
Yeah. So again, fair question. That's really what we've been talking about today, right? If you have a petition that has not been approved, obviously the next step then is to, as quickly as possible, find another employer who will file a new petition for you. Or if you have an approved petition, right, you have the approval notice from a petition that was filed by the initial employer. Again, Worldwide HealthStaff will find a new employer for you very, very quickly, probably within a week or 2 weeks, maybe at the outside, right? And then that approval notice becomes part of your new application, along with a request that your existing priority date be applied to the new petition. So those are really the steps that happen. Again, abandonment, if it does happen, and it happens on very rare occasions, obviously unwelcome, obviously causes some anxiety, but it is what I would describe as a bump in the road with an opportunity to pursue and very quickly secure an equal and maybe even better opportunity, particularly if you have been keeping your clinical experience up to date, you have a visa screen certificate, you're ready to go, and you have even a little bit of flexibility in terms of where it is that you will be assigned on a permanent basis.
Excellent point. The need for nurses is great.
Yeah.
Do big companies also abandon candidates?
Yeah, so it's in my experience, it really has little to do with the size of the company or the size of the employer, right? We've seen small organizations discontinue their international programs, and we've seen large organizations discontinue their programs after a change of leadership, many times, or perhaps in an effort to reorganize their finances. So it's a very interesting question, but I honestly can't say that I have found a particular trend where one type of employer, right? One type of employer is more likely to or more frequently discontinues a program than not. Look, there's been some high-profile abandonments over the last number of months. One of our competitors, Baylor Scott White, right? Very, very large organization, just canceled their program. We had this similar type of event with a client here, Novant, also very large healthcare organization. Again. Different people coming into leadership or having oversight of the program and just making an arbitrary decision that maybe, we would not agree with, but nevertheless making that decision. So I would not draw a correlation between the size of an organization and the likelihood of abandonment.
Next question. Since the USA is in need of nurses, what numbers are we talking about, and how many nurses do they need?
Yeah, well, that's a really big question, and there is a lot of research that's published. There's a lot of projections that are published from time to time. Both by government sources as well as academic researchers, as well as people in the workforce management space. I'll simply say that the shortage in the U.S. by any measure is in the hundreds of thousands. It's not 100,000, it's not 200,000, it's in the hundreds of thousands. Some project in the coming years it will be as high as 600,000. So just, that these are massive numbers and hard to wrap your head around. But just to give you some perspective on, let's just call it 400,000. And I think we would find strong research support showing that that's the type of shortage U.S. employers are facing. To put that in perspective, the total number of U.S. nursing graduates and NCLEX passers a year is currently just under 200,000. Okay, so let's call it 180,000 NCLEX passers, new NCLEX passers. Okay, and then we have to factor in the fact that all of those NCLEX passers are not interested or will not be applying for bedside nursing positions. They will either be looking to continue straight away in higher education to attain nurse practitioner or physician assistant status. Some of those nurses will go to work in places like pharmaceutical companies, in educational facilities, and various other opportunities that exist for registered nurses. So let's say that in a year, the U.S. is producing 150 or 160,000, okay, 150 or 160,000 new graduates looking to work at the bedside, okay. Put that against a shortage of 400. That means that all the graduates in the U.S. for the next 2.5 years would have to report for duty at the bedside. That assumes that there's zero retirements, when we know in reality retirements in the U.S. nursing workforce are actually accelerating, right? So the U.S. education system currently has no ability to close the gap between the supply of nurses and the demand for nurses, and therefore U.S. healthcare employers will continue to look around the world, particularly for experienced international nurses, and that is expected to continue for the long foreseeable future, simply because while the U.S. education system isn't closing the gap today, the demand for healthcare is actually increasing at the same time that the retirement rate, just based on the demographic profile of the workforce, is increasing as well. So if there's any concern about the U.S. not needing international nurses going forward, I can assure you very strongly that, in fact, they will.
Earlier in the presentation, we were talking about direct hire versus agency hire. What is the difference between direct hire versus agency hire in regards to hourly rate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really great question. So in a staffing agency relationship or arrangement, you are being paid by the staffing agency, and the staffing agency sets your rate of pay, not the hospital where you are assigned. Bear in mind that the staffing agency is contracting your services to a hospital, and they're obviously needing to make a margin, right? They're needing to charge the hospital more than what they're paying the nurses in an effort to generate revenue to cover their expenses and their investment in the applicant, which is fair, right? But in a staffing agency relationship, it is the staffing agency that sets the rate of pay. And, it's not difficult to understand that the greater the difference between what the staffing agency is able to charge the hospital and what they're paying the nurse, the greater that difference is, obviously the more money the staffing agency is able to make. Compare that to a direct hire opportunity where the nurse is being employed directly by the hospital, right? Directly by the hospital where they're assigned. That's number one. But why this matters is, as a direct employee of that facility, you have the confidence of knowing that you will be paid at the same hourly rate, and you will receive the same benefits and have the same obligations as every other similarly qualified nurse working for that employer. So if you have 5 years of experience, you're going to be earning the same as any other nurse, including domestic nurses, right, that are working there that have 5 years of experience. So in direct hire, in short, you have the absolute assurance that you're going to be treated equitably with your coworkers. In a staffing agency relationship, there's no assurance that you're going to be paid at the same rate of pay that is being received by the hospital nurses, the directly employed hospital nurses that you're working alongside of.
Good. Here's a good question. I hope no nurse gets abandoned, but it's unfortunate when it does. So why is it when a nurse abandons their contract, they're asked to buy out their contract, but when an employer abandons a contract, they are not required to compensate the nurse? Why is that?
Yeah, so I certainly can't speak, to every employer situation, but I can speak to our experience here at Worldwide HealthStaff, right? So in circumstances where a candidate abandons their petition with an employer, that employer has spent real money. That employer has paid for an immigration attorney. They've paid for immigration filing fees, perhaps some other fees. They've paid for some recruiting support. So in those cases, the employer has actually put money out of pocket. In the Worldwide HealthStaff context, right, if an employer abandons a petition, right, the nurse generally has, or not generally, always has paid zero. The nurse hasn't paid for the immigration attorney. The nurse hasn't paid any immigration filing fees. The nurse hasn't paid for any type of recruiting support. So I understand the question. I'm sure in some cases this might be an issue, but in the context of our business practices and our business model, that would be the explanation for or the specific response to this question.
Sure. Thank you. How many abandonments can one candidate go through?
Probably one is one too many, right? In theory, I don't know that there's, that I could say it's never going to happen more than once. But I can say in 26 years, I've never seen it happen more than once, right? I've never seen it happen more than once. Again, I'm speaking from my direct experience in the direct hire environment, right? Abandonment in the staffing agency context, could look like a job offer being withdrawn, or it could look like that agency just not having work for you and you either being greatly delayed in your arrival in the U.S. or perhaps not working full-time hours when you get here. So there's really, you would have to have, I won't even go there. It's super unlikely that anybody gets abandoned once. And in my 26 years, I've never seen anybody get abandoned twice.
Yeah. And what happens if your origin nationality is entered wrongly and it's totally different from what you are during the petition submission? Is it common to rectify this mistake, and how worried should I be?
Yeah. So if you find yourself in that circumstance, you immediately need to get in contact with either the immigration attorney that's managing your case, or if you have an assigned case manager who's your single point of contact, you need to be in touch with that person immediately. That issue does need to be corrected with USCIS, hopefully very, very soon before your petition gets any further along. So yes, that if that has occurred, that needs to be addressed at the earliest possible time.
Okay, thank you. How long does it take to recapture an abandoned I-140?
Yeah. So even now, in our context anyway, when we have found in a few cases abandoned applicants, those cases are generally refiled with premium processing. So generally, the recapture of a priority date can happen actually quite quickly. But at the same time, it's important to note it's not how quickly the second petition necessarily gets approved, because if you have a previously approved petition, you are keeping the priority date from that initial petition, right? Which means you're keeping your place in the queue. Look, I understand, in this circumstance, you want to have the assurance that your second application is approved as quickly as possible. We want to see that happen as well. But the most important thing is to know that priority date stays with you, and therefore you're essentially keeping your place in the queue.
Yeah. This is maybe it's more of a comment. I'll go ahead and read it, and just to get your thoughts. I could not complete the paperwork requested by the NVC due to abandonment, and was not sure if I could request support from employer B. If I can explain my reason for not completing my documentation is due to reasons beyond my control, I think I can still reinstate my petition and save my previous priority date. Is this a good issue to bring up with an assigned case manager?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great, there's a lot of case specific information there. So I'm not going to try and unpack all of that, right? But again, if you have an assigned case manager, you want to be working through that issue with them, or if there's an attorney that you're working with or your employer is working with directly, you certainly want to unpack that issue with them. Sounds to me like there's certainly a path forward here, but based on limited information, I'm not going to try to give a detailed response beyond that.
Sure. Hello, just want to know, while having a priority date, can I get an EAD to work in the U.S.?
Great question. Great question. And I think the answer is it depends. It depends whether you are currently inside the U.S. or outside of the U.S. And if you're inside the U.S., it also depends on a number of factors, right? Your current visa status, have you been in status, etc. So the information or the answer to that question is maybe, but it would be very case and fact specific. And, again, we'd have to get further into the details to give a definitive yes or no answer to that question. But if you're outside of the country and a petition has been filed, the answer, pretty clearly is no.
All right. And guys, you are providing a lot of great questions here. So I just want to say thank you so much. And I know we're getting close to time here, so I'm going to try to pull just a few more.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any possibilities to apply without hospital experience? My experience is polyclinic and dental.
Yeah. So again, I think the answer is it depends. I think in some cases the answer is yes. Are you currently working? How long ago did you graduate? Have you passed the NCLEX exam? Are all factors that would be taken into consideration. But if for the person who submitted that question, please feel free to submit your application to our recruitment team. There's a link where you can very quickly do that there in the yellow box in the yellow section of the chat feature on your screen. So the answer is we'd certainly welcome your resume, but again, we would look at those types of cases case by case and make a determination.
You touched on this one a little bit earlier, but it's such a great question. I think it's worth mentioning. And it's, should a nurse hired under Worldwide HealthStaff be abandoned? What will Worldwide do for them?
So the answer is very quickly, find them another employer. Very, very quickly. If that refile their petition with premium processing, if they have an approval notice from the prior petition, if that applicant had, with their initial application, progressed to the point where they had paid the NVC fee for family members, Worldwide HealthStaff will pay the NVC fee for family members related to the second application, because those fees may have to be repaid. And if so, Worldwide HealthStaff will pay them. And Worldwide HealthStaff has, as I shared earlier, the opportunity to very quickly connect any candidate with a very large number of opportunities. I'm very confident saying more opportunities with more employers and more locations than anybody else.
All right. If my petition was filed, not approved, and abandoned, do we need to again file the petition and have a new priority date?
The answer to that is yes. Okay. Tracy, we're coming right up on time, so if there's one more question, let's take that. But I do want to be respectful of everyone's time as well.
Absolutely. Let me pull one more question here. I want to keep it a little more on topic. Lots of great questions here. H-1B, TN visa questions. Let's see here. How about... Okay. Final question. Firstly, thank you so much for the valuable information. I got a job offer for direct hire, and the I-140 petition is filed and now waiting for received report from USCIS. This abandonment might be somewhat stressful for us regarding change, as we cannot be so sure of the job offer we have. How will you assist us in case of abandonment? Similar to the previous question.
So as we've already discussed, right, in the highly, highly unlikely case that happens, right, we will pivot very, very quickly, have you interview with a new employer sometimes within a matter of days, certainly within a week or two, get a new petition filed with premium processing. Make sure work to see that your priority is recaptured so that your application goes forward without any disruption. Let me just say in closing, Tracy, if someone had a question about H-1B visas for nurses, if you visit our YouTube channel, we've done webinar presentations not that long ago, specifically on the topic of H-1B, specifically on the topic of TN. So if that's questions that you have, please visit our YouTube channel and you'll find recordings of those presentations there. And I'm sure you'll find them to be very helpful. So Tracy, I think with that, we're about to wrap up another successful presentation. Any last thoughts or comments from you before we wrap up today, Tracy?
No, thank you, Ron, for the informational webinar. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and your questions, joining us for all of our webinars, because we try to present lots of different information on relevant topics, helpful to you, so we can get you here safe and as fast as possible for the healthcare positions that are very much in need here in the U.S. So, guys, thank you so much.
Tracy, thank you also. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Don't hesitate to share your questions and comments with the Worldwide HealthStaff team. And please be watching Facebook and Instagram for information on upcoming webinar presentations that may be of interest to you. You're always welcome to join. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.